Welcome to the Dairy News and Views podcast, a production of the Iowa State University Extension and Outreach Dairy Team. Our podcast covers current educational, research, and industry tools available for your operation to manage healthy cows and calves while producing the highest quality dairy products. Thanks for joining us today on Dairy News and Views from the ISUEO Dairy Team. I'm Jen Bentley, Northeast Iowa Dairy Field Specialist, and today I'm here with my Extension Dairy Team colleague, Fred Hall, our Northwest Iowa Dairy Field Specialist. So on today's episode, we're going to recap some discussions from a webinar we previously hosted on fly control, a very timely topic as we head into this summer. And so let's kick off the discussion here, Fred. So welcome back.
Well, thank you very much. The fly control issue isn't a one and done. Nobody in agriculture expects that. But it was really interesting to hear the discussion of the webinar this week on what some of the research data is telling us.
So tell us who was our guest on the webinar and maybe just a little bit about what she does in fly control.
Well, she is Rebecca Trout-Fixel. She's a medical and veterinary entomologist at the University of Tennessee and an associate professor in the Department of Entomology and Plant Pathology. She works with a lot of different groups, and for agriculture, for livestock, she works with producers on ticks and managing flies on both dairy and beef cattle. She's earned her degrees from Transylvania University, University of Kentucky, and University of Arkansas, and completed a postdoctoral training at the University of California, Davis. She has really become one of the top 3 or 4 folks in entomology as it relates to flies and pests that affect livestock.
Yeah, I thought she brought some really good practical information to the webinar, some good resources that are good for, not just Iowa, but lots of different states. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. And, at the end of her webinar, I know she was mentioning she's doing a study that she's, asking producers to be involved with. So, as we conclude the webinar, conclude the podcast here today, if anybody's interested in learning more about that study, I'm sure we could get you the resources to either participate or just learn more about, some of the research that she's doing there. So, one of the things that we talked about on the webinar was the different types of flies. And I think, depending on where we are on the farm, there's different flies, right? Whether we're in the freestall barn, dry lots, calves, just out in general in the farm. So what can you describe some of those flies and, some potential concerns that we should be concerned about with our livestock?
Absolutely. And it was interesting that she prefaced her current research by doing a study. We thought, or at least when I first heard that, I thought, well, we all know we have house flies, around the dairy, and we have face flies. But the fact that she actually went on farms and worked with producers to identify, what flies are the most common and most problematic for livestock producers, whether it's beef cattle or heifers on pasture, or dairy cattle in a parlor freestall situation. And so unsurprisingly, horn flies and face flies are the most commonly found on cattle in pasture. Stable and house flies are the most commonly found on dairy cattle in the barn and milking facilities. House flies are a nuisance for everybody, workers and cattle alike. And they're pretty indicative that there's a general sanitation problem. They don't bite, so it's not as though they're really causing problems other than they're a nuisance. Stable flies, deer flies, horse flies, they feed on blood from the back and the legs, bellies, and udders. And, especially stable flies, they have that long bayonet-like proboscis that is a painful sting when they go to feed. So, each type of fly has a little different uh, perspective when it comes to causing a problem for the cattle. Uh, and production losses are the first concern. Cows that are uncomfortable, standing group, trying to fight flies aren't eating and laying down. So there's production loss. But remember, flies spread disease. Pink eye and mastitis come to mind right off the top. For instance, horn flies, most commonly found on the backs of animals, but will attack the teats. And that leads to the development of mastitis, especially in heifers that are coming into the milking line. There's really good data from Georgia researchers that have identified the prevalence of mastitis caused by staph aureus in heifers that have had damage and scabs to teat ends caused by horn flies. So, this is a real issue. Cost us milk production and cost us some health issues.
Yeah, all good points. And, probably something we don't really necessarily think that it could cause that much, you know, economic damage, but it really, when you take a look at heifers, and if you start to see cases of mastitis in those heifers, that can really add up in a hurry.
And it'll follow, through that whole lactation. And, that's where we see the aggregate losses as far as production and animal health. And it's, fly control starts with one basic thing, and that's sanitation. It's the key to any fly control program since it removes fly breeding sites. And that's kind of the good thing about dairies. Uh, we have to keep the dairy clean. We have to remove filth and manure just to keep our milk license. So that's a good thing. Uh, if we have proper sanitation, then we can use less chemical. If we don't have that good sanitation program, then the chemical control treatments probably will be of a more limited success because the flies are breeding faster than we can, kill them.
Yeah, I think that's, a couple times a year I get phone calls about fly control, particularly this time of year. They're starting to see flies, and it may start to get out of control, and they're wondering what is that golden ticket to controlling flies, right? And it seems to be there really is not just one single treatment. It seems like it's a whole process of some good management practices. So can you talk a little bit about some of those different types of protocols that producers might think about?
Yeah, and I'll go back and recite it again. We really want to, have it start out with sanitations. Uh, from the barns, loafing sheds, calf pens, removing manure at least twice a week. Ultimately, we want a dry bedding or a dry pile because flies require moisture to breed. So, we know the fly season can start early May, sometimes April. It can run past September and October. So that's a lot of time when we have to consider how we control. Uh, Area fly sprays be applied to fly resting areas in the barn and loafing sheds. Uh, Insecticides is applied as space sprays, as mist or fogs. They have rapid knockdown. Yeah, you'll see flies drop almost immediately, but they have no residual activity and will only control flies at that time of application. Fly baits are useful, supplement to sprays. Uh, they still require good sanitation because wherever the bait isn't, you've got flies. Feed additives will aid in preventing fly breeding, primarily house flies, and manure from animals being fed the larvicide. Uh, and it works. And that's certainly one of the strong items we have in the arsenal to control flies.
I think she also talked about those cow vacs, as you know, if cows are coming off pasture and they're coming into the parlor system, those vacuum type systems. Can you talk a little bit more about what she found with those?
Absolutely. They had actually done some research there at the university dairy and found them to be fairly effective. Uh, they do require some maintenance. They do require that the dairyman is aware of, the cow movement. There's also some data where they are not as effective as one might think. They do have a cost, not only in the equipment that you have to set up in the return alley from the barn to the parlor, but requires electricity, requires maintenance because they are close to 1,700 pound animals that are walking through there. They get bumped and knocked out of whack periodically. So, yes, if you have one, you maintain it well, especially if you are vacuuming off the flies as they come into the parlor, makes milking just a little bit easier because they don't have the assault on their legs and udders and backs from flies.
Yeah, so it sounds like it could be, just another one of those tools in your toolbox for your fly control program, right? So
Yep.
kind of take a look at the whole operation as a whole of what's going to work on each individual farm there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that, we talk about control and what is in the toolbox, but one of the simplest things, and she reminded me of it, is something that, I was doing 30 years ago, was tacking an index card around the barn and to free stalls in the feeding area. Flies consume and they defecate and regurgitate, and you get fly specks. And, if you start out and you collect those once a week, okay, here's, on my first one, here is where we're starting the fly season. And as you move through, if you see, okay, we've sprayed and it didn't change the number of fly specks, okay, that strategy didn't work very well. You need to consider something else. And it's really a very effective method to monitor what's going on with the flies in and about our our barns and parlor. And I think maybe that's one of those real parochial things that we've kind of quit doing in the world of technology that really does give you a good monitor of what your control strategy is doing.
Yeah, I like that idea, Fred. A pretty simple, inexpensive tool. Gets to the point very quickly of whether your fly control program is effective or maybe you need to reevaluate throughout the year on what's going on the farm.
Yeah.
Um, Kind of to conclude, I know she mentioned some resources for our producers in helping, make their decision-making process of what types of fly control programs should I be using, what's most effective. Can you direct us to where those are?
Absolutely. She introduced one that I wasn't familiar with, but I've been playing with it now for a couple of days, and that's the Vet Pest X. And that's at the veterinaryentomology.org website. And what it is they have all the registered pesticides and they have all the states. So you go in and while we're visiting, I'm doing it right along. You click in your state, you click on, if you know a specific issue you're having on, let's say, your heifers and calves, and then you're not sure what kind of flies, you just put general flies, and you want to have an on animal spray. Uh, so you go ahead and you click that through, and then you can look. And right now, I'm seeing 13 licensed products that can be used with calves. Uh, they all happen to be a 3A IRAC code. There's perithium is kind of the base product, and they give the manufacturers and the EPA code. This is kind of all the information you're going to need to say, okay, these are products that have efficacy on my calves and they're legal for me to spray. The neat thing that this will do is you put in your records what you've used and just put a -3A. And then next year, you probably want to look for something in a different class, or one that had an additional product in it, just so you don't generate any resistance. And you can do this on your lactating animals. If you happen to have beef animals, you can use that for this. But it really, and it's updated, annually. So that's a lot of times, we have product left over, or we've always used cattle armor. And the next year there's a change in their formulation, and it's no longer licensed the way it was before. And now you could be applying it illegally. This gives you up-to-date information. You can click on it and see labels. I think it's really a neat way for those folks in the dairies who like going to the computer and finding that information. The other thing that I've been promoting the last several years is the insect control on dairy cattle. Lee Thompson has done this every year. He'll update it. He's from the University of Kentucky, and he's allowed me to reproduce it. And it does a really neat job. He does the same thing just on a paper you can print out and put on your desk. Control adult flies in milk rooms, control flies excluding milk rooms, fly baits, the misters, pasture fly control, back rubbers, ear tags for lactating animals, just every class that you want to use. He's got it listed. I just think it's a excellent publication, and I'm glad Lee allows us to include that on our website.
Perfect. And we'll definitely put these resources into our show notes here today. We'll get the links in there so people have direct access to both of those documents. Very good resources. We're coming towards the end of May, beginning of June here. And so things are gearing up for summer. Summer heat is here. So that means flies are here too, right? So having a plan early is very important to keeping them under control.
Absolutely. And I hate to sound like a broken record, but it starts with good sanitation around our dairies and in our pastures.
Well, thanks for being on here, Fred. And we want to thank our listeners for joining us today. And we look forward to visiting with you on the next Dairy News and Views from ISU.
Thank you, Jen. Look forward to next time.
This institution is an equal opportunity provider. For the full non-discrimination statement or combination inquiries, go to www.extension.iastate.edu/diversity/ext.